Man, I miss old Overwatch. This was, at one point, the game pretty much everyone was playing back in the day. Revolutionized the hero shooter genre, and even won Game of the Year in 2016. But fast forward almost 9 years later, and nowadays, it barely gets a fraction of the popularity it once had. Now, you don't need a Harvard degree to know what happened to Overwatch. What is there to say that hasn't been said already? That it's a shell of its former self and isn't the same game as it once was? How it failed to live up to expectations and blatantly lied to its fanbase? How they left the game rotting for years, only to give us an unnecessary sequel and slap a 2 at the end of it, expecting all to be forgiven? Why so many people call this game dead? I've heard it all, and I'm inclined to agree. But please don't let that bitterness and hatred blind you from how great this game once was. From the lore, the amazing characters, the unique gameplay, the esports, the community, you name it, I was in love with this game. And I know I wasn't the only one. So instead of beating on this game like a dead horse, I wanted to dedicate this video to talk about the good times, the cheerful moments I still look back on fondly as some of the funnest memories growing up, and to shine a light on one of my favorite video games of all time. My journey with Overwatch actually started on console, specifically the Xbox One. I remember first learning about this game through the advertised beta on the home screen menu after getting back from school one day, and seeing that all my friends are already playing it, I decided to give it a try and download it for myself. And once I loaded into my first match on King's Row and got my first kill of Genji, I was immediately hooked in. My friends and I would play this game every day after school for the remainder of its open beta. And I specifically remember one day how excited I was to play Overwatch after school and how crushed I felt after learning the beta went offline the same day. But I never had that much fun with a beta up until that point, so I eagerly waited for its release and started researching the heck out of it. I remember watching every gameplay trailer to learn about all the new characters and their abilities, all the cinematic trailers and animated shorts that offered a glimpse into the game's world and story, diving into any leaks I could find, and tuning into the dev updates hosted by our glorious king Jeff Kaplan. I was beyond hyped, and eventually, on May 24th, 2016, my friends and I queued up until midnight to be one of the first people to officially play the game. This game was like nothing else I've ever played before. While it took a lot of elements from other FPS titles before it, most notably Team Fortress 2 and Quake, it combined them with the characteristics of MOBAs, featuring personable characters that had their own unique abilities and ultimates, and its emphasis on teamwork-driven gameplay, exemplified by the game having no traditional team deathmatch mode, but instead objective-based maps, giving us something new and refreshing. To delve into the development history of Overwatch for just a bit, this game originally stemmed from the cancelled MMO project, Titan, that Blizzard was working on previously, but would later repurpose most of the assets and concepts to create Overwatch. And as soon as the game launched, it instantly became a global phenomenon, bringing over players from all sorts of different gaming backgrounds, with many people already praising it as being the next big thing and getting so many positive reviews from the get-go. Now, the early years of Overwatch were drastically different from the game it is now. You just had to be there to make sense of all the absurd things that were in the game back then. Firstly, there were no hero limits at launch, meaning you could have a full team of the same character if you wanted, like a pack of Winstons jumping on a poor support, or have 6 Symmetras and place all your turrets at the same choke point. They would swiftly add a hero limit though, but kept it around as a separate arcade mode luckily. There was also the offense and defense hero class, alongside the tank and support roles. Each hero in these categories were supposedly better at pushing or holding an objective, like attackers having more damage output and mobility, and defenders having more sniping and stationary kits, but they were basically interchangeable in-game and made no real difference, causing them to eventually group them all into the damage category. They even shifted Symmetra from being a support to a damage hero, after she became a glorified middle finger for anyone asked to swap to support. Some of the early heroes also have ridiculously overpowered and straight up broken abilities. Honorable mentions go to Bastion having a shield while in turret form, Hanzo's infamous scatter arrows, Reaper's lifesteal coming from souls dropped on the ground, Mercy being able to resurrect her entire team with her ult, Torbjorn being able to hand out shields, Roadhog's game-breaking hook, McCree's fan to hammer being able to one-shot tanks, Symmetra's primary fire locking onto targets, and the list goes on. You just had to experience them to understand, and the UI of the original game was so iconic, dare I say, perfect. Starting with the main menu, this is what you love to see. I loved how everything was listed so clearly on the left side with those oh so good looking italicized fonts, with the bigger text dedicated for more prominent features like training and the hero gallery, and the smaller text meant for trivial tasks like viewing your career profile, social tab, and accessing the options menu. And I especially loved how the background would change for different events, preventing it from feeling stale. Speaking of the career profile, I miss the days of them always being public and being able to hover over a name and instantly see what their top 3 most played heroes are, but I do understand why some players would prefer to keep them private. Going through the in-game HUD and layout, you had the kill feed that shows the 2D portrait of heroes, with a little symbol quickly explaining how they died. The OG on fire system, which appeared around a character's portrait when that player was on a kill streak or playing super well, weapons having infinite ammo, not having to worry about running out like in other games, and how the ultimate meter looked with those dash spaces. But the scoreboard was pretty weird, in that you could only see your stats and no one else's, and the only way to gauge if you're doing better than somebody was a scuffed metal system. But the most beloved features came during the end of matches. You had the iconic play of the game, reminiscent of Call of Duty's final kill cam, but instead showcased the best play from the match, or so what the game thought was the best play. And of course, the post-match voting screen, where everyone dreamt of getting a +10 voted gold player stat card. With Overwatch 2 though, some of these features were improved upon and others were just straight up removed for no reason, but they would eventually bring some of them back after popular demand, such as loot boxes. Something we might forget about Overwatch is that it pushed the loot box mechanic into the mainstream over here in the West, with it seemingly being in every game around this time. Instead of the battle pass system we all love to hate, and some developers selling skins for over $200, this game had us unlock cosmetics through a gacha crate system, where every time you leveled up, you earned a loot box that would give you a bunch of random cosmetics varying different rarities. Or you could just buy them in bulk or hoard them and never open them like a weirdo. Each hero had a set of skins, emotes, and sprays that would range from rare blues to epic purples and legendary yellows. And the skins for each hero looked amazing, whether it be simple color swaps, cooler themed sets, or the legendary skins that would completely change the character's whole look. My favorites were always the younger versions of certain heroes, like Genji, Ana, and Soldier 76. And even if you got a duplicate of the skin you already had, it would transfer in the credits, where you could save up and later buy whatever skin you actually wanted, which was nice. And with all the seasonal events that would occur, they would add even more amazing skins reflecting each holiday, like the summer games giving us sports themed skins and color palettes of each hero's nationality, Halloween Terror giving us Witch Mercy and other Halloween themed cosmetics, Winter Wonderland giving us a bunch of festive skins, Lunar New Year's giving us Chinese inspired cosmetics, and Overwatch Anniversary letting the designers cook up whatever they wanted, leading to some of the most iconic skins. You can dog on Blizzard and Overwatch all you want about their monetization methods, but you can't deny how cool and well designed their skins are. And the same goes for their maps. Compared to the over 60 maps available in Overwatch 2 now, this game originally launched with just 12 maps, 3 for each of the 4 game modes available, and almost all of them have become cult classics, with most preferring to play one of the older ones over these newer maps. Starting with seemingly everyone's favorite game mode, Control, which was their King of the Hill type mode, you had Lijiang Tower, Ilios, and Nepal, each having 3 different arenas within the overarching map, with both sides being symmetrical to give no teams an advantage. And the amount of excitement my friends and I had whenever we loaded into one was wild, especially for Lucio mains. There's also Escort, where you had to push a payload across the map, featuring Watchpoint Gibraltar, Dorado, and Route 66. You had hybrid maps, which combined Control and Escort, where you need to capture a specific point at the beginning of the map first, to unlock a payload to then escort to the end of the map, which included Kings Row, Numbani, and Hollywood. And lastly, the infamous Assault maps, which was basically hybrid, but included 2 capture points instead. 2CP was often regarded as one of the most redundant and exhausting modes, however, due to how snowbally and unbalanced the matches were, but you can't deny that the maps were beautiful, like Temple of Anubis, Hanamura, and Volskaya Industries, which are still some of my favorite Overwatch 1 maps to this day. But probably the most impactful and beneficial feature added to Overwatch was competitive play. Even before Blizzard announced their own ranked mode, everyone knew this game was inherently competitive, and we didn't have to wait long, as it would release only a month after launch. Season 1 was super weird though, where it had a 1 to 100 skill rating scale and a coin flip sudden death system, but would expand to a 1 to 5000 SR scale the following season, and the medal rating system we all know and what pretty much every other game uses now, making the climb between ranks more rewarding and the skill level of each tier easier to understand. And all the icons looked magnificent, with them still being sorely missed. And this would soon become the new premier mode pretty much everyone played, since most of the player base were competitive sweaty tryhards that loved to flex their digital rank over others. I started playing comp during Season 2, and that's when I started looking up YouTube guides on how to get better at the game, learning more about important things like positioning, the difference between flex and main roles, and utilizing certain hero pairings. Blizzard would continue to update Overwatch throughout the years, adding more features and slowly evolving the game over time. For heroes, they introduced 3 new characters during Year 1, Ana, Sombra, and Orisa, who would all become staples within Overwatch, with some newer players not even realizing that these characters weren't in the game at one point. And Blizzard would continue at the same pace, eventually adding 11 new heroes in total throughout Overwatch 1's lifespan, upping the original roster from 21 to 32. With each new hero further enriching the lore and providing unique ability sets meant to shake up the game, some were even teased way before their induction too, like Ana and Doomfist. And the rollouts for some of them were sick, with the devs teasing us with in-game map changes to help build excitement. They would also release a bunch of new maps too, ranging from bangers to welcomed additions to the would unplug my console to dodge type maps. But even still, it's crazy how seamless most of the new maps were and how well they fit within Overwatch. My personal favorites were Eichenwald, Oasis, Busan, and Blizzard World. They would also add a bunch of smaller maps for newer game modes too, like Deathmatch, Elimination, Capture the Flag, and the best game mode ever invented, Lucio Ball. These weren't core game modes, but instead fun little arcade modes that gave players a break from the usual format, much like Mystery Heroes and No Hero Limits, and would also make for good warm-up lobbies in the future. And with the aforementioned seasonal events, they would add even more unique side modes too, like Junkenstein's Revenge and May's Snowball Offensive. But to satisfy the more casual player base, Blizzard would add limited time PvE events, which would later become known as Archive events. These 4-player co-op activities were meant to flesh out the lore a bit more and give us a glimpse of what a story mode could look like in Overwatch. Starting with Uprising, taking place on King's Row and canonically being Tracer's first mission of Overwatch, and later enhanced with Retribution, featuring the Blackwatch team, and Storm Rising teasing Ramatra years before Overwatch 2. Many players consider this era as prime Overwatch, and the cultural impact it had was insane. If I didn't grow up with OG Minecraft or Call of Duty, Overwatch might have been the game to do it for me. This game had everything going for it. Funny montages, animations, song parodies, cereal sponsorships, collectible figures, other stuff. And I especially remember watching so many OG Overwatch content creators back in the day, before they swapped over to other games or straight up disappeared off the face of the earth, like Muselk, XQC, Tim the Tatman, Aimbot Calvin, Seagull, Snipsy, Your Overwatch, Stylosa, and so many more. Early Overwatch is one of the most nostalgic periods of my life. But besides just the gameplay and everything else surrounding it, there was another reason why so many people fell in love with this game.
I made a chronal accelerator. I'm sure I can do this. To all agents of...
One of the biggest draws for a lot of fans was this game's lore and iconic characters. For those unaware or uncultured, the world of Overwatch takes place in the near future where robots and humans were once at war with one another, known as the Omnic Crisis, and because of this, the world united to create a global task force known as Overwatch, featuring a colorful cast of soldiers with unique abilities and from different nationalities all over the world. Sounds eerily similar to another game. With there being no traditional campaign or story mode, the lore of this game was presented in a pretty unconventional way at the time, with it mainly playing in the background, and the actual gameplay having no real resemblance to the in-world story whatsoever. Many theorized that the gameplay was actually an in-world simulation meant for the characters to practice with, but at this point, who knows what the lore is anymore. While there are all sorts of ways to delve into the game's story now, the main way most people viewed it were through the cinematic trailers and animated shorts Blizzard released. To say that these were amazing would be an understatement. Each short delved into a certain character's backstory and took place on in-game maps as a setting, with us even seeing the aftermath of events that happened during matches. And it felt like an anthology series of short films, exploring how all the characters fit into this astonishing world and what they've been up to since Overwatch's disbandment. Plus, they were also used as promos to advertise new heroes and maps, so it was a win-win. I remember getting so hyped whenever a new animated short dropped, with my personal favorites being The Last Bastion and Dragons. I still tear up watching it. And Overwatch knocked it out of the park when it came to their hero designs. All the characters had distinct visual identities, taking heavy inspiration from the countries they originate from, with it being easy to tell what each hero does just based on their looks. The incredible voice acting and their iconic lines adds even more personality to them, and with so many different nationalities each of the heroes represented, it felt like anyone could relate to at least someone, which was how I came to love some of my early mains, such as Tracer, Bastion, d.va, and Zenyatta. Not to mention, the world building for this game was phenomenal. Something I especially loved were the fantasized elements of our real world and their unique takes on different cities. For example, Numbani basically being their version of Wakanda before Black Panther released, London still keeping its rustic and steampunk aesthetic, but features futuristic elements of their iconic buildings and double-deckered buses, Australia being a wasteland and living in a post-apocalyptic state separate from the world, and South Korea being this futuristic cyberpunk city, but still pays homage to its traditions and past. It still baffles my mind how we never got any sort of TV show or movie about Overwatch, especially with the success of other video game adaptations like Arcane and Cyberpunk Edgerunners. It just felt like a missed opportunity. And something else I wanted to mention previously, but also feels fitting here, was how inspiring the music was for this game. Not just for the cinematics, but with the in-game music as well. This game's original music might be up there for one of the most iconic video game soundtracks, with many players still vividly remembering each song. Whether it be the little tunes that play while loading into a map, the famous play of the game victory music, or the main theme and hearing those horns every time I booted up the game, these will forever be ingrained into my brain. With any competitive game, the meta would constantly change with different balance patches, causing it to feel like a revolving door for which heroes were overpowered and which ones were borderline useless. For most lower ranked players, this didn't really matter to them, as you could get by just one trick in a hero and playing comfort picks, but for the higher ranks and competitive scene, it was basically a must. In going through the history of Overwatch and rewatching old VODs, you can almost mark what year the game was in based on what the meta was at the time. Back in the early days, you had metas like Beyblade, where the focal point was farming nano boost for Reaper's ult, making him spin like an unstoppable Beyblade. Early Dive, where you play high mobile heroes that dive the backline and all target one player, making it feel like a 1v6. Moth meta, where Mercy's sole goal was to stay alive and resurrect her entire team. And other notable metas would surface throughout the game's lifecycle, like Brawl, Poke, Pirate Ship, Double Sniper, Double Shield, and so many other varieties. But there is one meta that outshined all the others and what many view as the turning point for Overwatch: GOATs. With the introduction of Brigitte, she would single-handedly bring this game into one of the darkest eras, leading to tons of players quitting the game and forcing Blizzard to make some of the biggest changes in Overwatch's history. The whole premise of this meta was 3 tanks, 3 supports, and no DPS, because of how ridiculous Brigitte's healing output was every time she dealt damage, and the name actually originated from a contenders team, who stomped the tier 2 scene using this team comp, leading many tier 1 teams to adopt it, and forcing many DPS players to switch over to other damage dealing tanks or supports, resulting in some of the best Zarya players in the world being DPS players. I guess you could say this game was goated. Eventually, enough was enough, and Blizzard, after months of doing nothing, decided to finally do something about it. Role queue was something that divided the community when it was first announced. This new change forced teams to only allow 2 tanks, 2 DPS, and 2 supports at all times, and would become the new de facto standard way to play. Pretty much, once you queued into a specific role, you were locked into that role for the entire match, being unable to change it during the game, but would still be able to swap to different characters within the given role when needed. They also gave us 3 separate ranks for each role now, but would still keep a separate open queue competitive mode, where players could still play the game like before, although was taken less seriously. While it was a sigh of fresh air to be able to play DPS again, have a more streamlined, structured format for matches, many players missed the ability to play whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and questioned why they couldn't have just properly balanced the game in the first place. Personally, I really enjoyed this change, since before, ranked was basically a free-for-all with players opting to just play whoever they wanted rather than caring for the team composition. Role lock was, in my opinion, healthier in the long run of things, where now you could at least expect to have a proper spread of roles and have some sort of actual support. You might not get the proper healers, but it was still better than nothing. But I do understand why some people did not like this change, especially with the horrendous queue times for DPS. But nevertheless, the game would shortly adjust to these new changes, adding priority passes for DPS players, and even testing out hero pools, where they would randomly ban 4 heroes in competitive play for an extended period of time, and Blizzard would start to elevate the game even more, adding more prominent features like custom workshops, the server browser tab, endorsements to discourage toxicity, having the option to avoid teammates, and a bunch of other things I'm probably forgetting that are still in the game to this day. But still, many players were starting to get fed up with the so problematic queue times, the amount of crowd control abilities that were rampant in the game, and the devs taking months to respond to blatant issues and community backlash. And so, Blizzard had a plan for that. Out of nowhere, Blizzard announced Overwatch 2 at BlizzCon 2019, making a sequel for a game that didn't really need one, again, and Blizzard promised to radically overhaul the game by introducing a new story mode featuring replayable missions, a character skill tree that amplified abilities and could be fully customized, and retooling heroes so that there's less CC abilities spread throughout roles. But it wouldn't be released until much later, so they ended up splitting the development team, where some were kept on to keep the current Overwatch alive and operating, while the rest worked on the sequel. So during this 3-year period, we had no major updates or new characters added. While they did keep the seasonal events around and made new skins here and there, Echo would be the last major update for Overwatch 1 in April of 2020. Strangely enough, this was probably when I played Overwatch the most. Around this time was when I swapped over to PC and started grinding comp, actually caring about my rank, which was how I ended up as a main tank player. Before on console, I would flex around, playing mainly DPS, but would swap to support and tank when needed. But it wasn't until I joined one of my high school friends' 5-stack, where the only role open was main tank, and with me not being too familiar with mouse and keyboard controls just yet, my mechanics weren't the best, but my game sense was still there, so it was a natural fit. My friends and I would play this game almost every day, grinding ranked in our newly formed 6-stack, which eventually led us to form our own amateur team called FreeSR. Because of them, I was able to reach my peak of Diamond on PC, and possibly could have made it to Masters, if I wasn't so burnt out from having to deal with the role of being a main tank player. But hey, I'll take it. And around this time was when I also started watching more of the prominent Overwatch content creators you see now, like Saltyfish, Super, Emong, Flats, J3, ML7, CarQ, The Real Kenzo, Aspen, Noob Hunter, and others. For me, I quite enjoyed this era of Overwatch. Maybe it's my reluctance to change, but I wasn't too bothered by there being no new characters or features added, and the balancing was relatively better, with there not being a new broken hero added every 3 to 4 months, making it easier to maintain the current roster of more frequent patches. But there is one last thing about Overwatch that by far had the greatest influence on me. I originally thought about making a whole dedicated video just talking about the Overwatch League and how much it has impacted my life, but thought it'd be more fitting as a section for an over-encompassing video of Overwatch itself. This game was my gateway into esports, something I'm super passionate about and still watch to this day. Before, I was familiar with the concept of competitive gaming, mainly with Call of Duty and League of Legends, but this was the final push that had me go all in with esports. Back in the early days of Overwatch, you had iconic orgs like Team MVS, Cloud9, NRG, Rogue, and Misfits over in America and Europe, and other leagues in China and APAC, who helped pioneer the esports scene by hosting community-driven events filled with so many up-and-coming talents, but none did it better than the Koreans. OGN's Apex was the premier competition for early Overwatch, and the South Koreans were by far the best players to touch the game. Now, it's probably worth mentioning that Blizzard already had a grasp on South Korea, with StarCraft being one of the biggest sensations in the country, and this led to the South Korean government to invest heavily into the emerging industry, focusing on internet infrastructure and recognizing esports as an actual sport, leading to the rise of so many PC bongs you see today, and them even founding KESPA, the Korean Esports Association, kinda like their own version of FIFA, which is why they are so cracked at pretty much every video game. But going back to Apex, you had so many iconic teams during this period, like Lunatic High, Team Runaway, GC Busan, Kongdu Panthera, Afrika Freaks, and so many iconic players would soon emerge from this league, becoming a glorified scouting ground for greater tournaments, one of which was the Overwatch World Cup. This was a yearly tournament hosted at BlizzCon where countries all around the world would form teams to compete and represent their nation, in a format similar to the FIFA World Cup. Unsurprisingly, South Korea would win almost every year, and rooting for them was the highlight of my summers. But seeing who would finish second was always a nice competition. But 2 years after the game's initial release, the Overwatch League would officially form in 2018, a brand new franchise league featuring city-based teams, something never done before in esports, and would spark the trend of other publishers adopting the franchise model, where team owners had to pay an initial buy-in fee of around $20 to $30 million, with the first season only featuring 12 teams, but would soon expand to 20 the following season. While it did throw off the esports fanbase by ditching the usual org names we've come to know and love, I personally loved all the teams' brandings, logos, names, color schemes, jerseys, and it was cool being able to buy their skins in-game and rep them during your matches, which directly supported them too, especially the custom-made ones to commemorate each season's champion and MVP. And the league itself felt super professional, with teams having 8 to 12 man rosters, guaranteed 50k minimum contracts for players, the Twitch broadcast and the All Access Pass, the Blizzard Arena in LA where all the matches were played from, all the individual awards like Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year, Role Stars, the Dennis Howelkel Award, and the short-lived All-Stars, and the formats for each season were interesting. I personally love the planned idea of having the Atlantic and Pacific conferences split into 4 divisions, and having teams compete across mini tournaments throughout the year. Because of my love for Lunatic High and the 2017 South Korean World Cup roster, they would get signed to South Korea's new premier AL team, Seoul Dynasty, and with me being Korean American and already being a fan of those players, it was a no-brainer decision, which was how I eventually became a fan of their parent org, Gen G, and their League of Legends and Valorant teams. However, my allegiance would be split with the Philadelphia Fusion, as their city is located in the same state as me. so I would always have a soft spot for them. But with the Seoul Dynasty struggling throughout the first season of the Overwatch League, my focus would slowly shift over to the Philadelphia Fusion, and would fall in love with all the players throughout the organization's history. The first couple seasons of the Overwatch League had so many iconic teams and players that I still remember today. For example, you had the 2018 NYXL, featuring the former LW Blue Core of Sabiolbi, Pine, Libero, Mono, and Jonak, the 2018 London Spitfire, combining the GC Busan and C9 Kongdu team members, Prophet, Birdring, Gesture, Fury, and B Dozen, the back-to-back champions, the San Francisco Shock and their hybrid roster featuring legendary players like Rascal, Striker, Super, Choi Hyobin, Smurf, Violet, and Moth, the 2019 Team Runaway Vancouver Titans, with Haxel, Sominsu, Stitch, Janu, Slime, Twilight, and my GOAT Bumper, Philadelphia Fusion and all their iconic rosters, forever being stuck in second place, with Carpe, EQO, Sato, Poco, Neptuno, Boombox, Fraggy, Snillo, Funny Astro, Alarm, and the undefeated Chipsa. The Shanghai Dragons going from 0-40 in the inaugural season to the 2021 champions with Fleta, Lip, Fate, Void, Lee Jae-gon, and Izayaki. The 2022 Element Mystic Dallas Fuel with Sparkle, Edison, Fearless, Hanbin, Fielder, and Chio. And we can't forget how incredibly stacked their broadcast talents were. My favorite personalities were Uber and Matt Mr. X, Brennan Sideshow, and the 2021 Aldesk, featuring Rheinforce, Sombi, Custa, Danny, and later Jake. I would keep up with the Overwatch League during the first 2 seasons, tuning into all the important or exciting matches, but it wasn't until Season 3 when I started religiously following the league. If I had the time, I could yap about every single team roster, player, coach, storylines from each season, and iconic moments like a Wikipedia page. I was that tuned in. And something that's a bit shameful to admit now was that part of the reason why I moved to Philadelphia for college was to see the Philadelphia Fusion play live. Unfortunately, I was never able to do so because of COVID, but was lucky enough to join my college's esports club and Overwatch team as a tank player, eventually becoming the team's manager, and later the vice president of the entire club. Still, it saddens me that I wasn't able to attend the 2019 Grand Finals in Philadelphia or the Fusion homestand in 2020, but I was able to fulfill my lifelong dream of attending an AL event when I visited South Korea. Coincidentally, it just so happened that the Mid-Season Madness was happening at the same time, so my friend Minsuk and I went there and had a blast. We got to meet and see so many pros in person, like Carpe, Shockwave, and I even got space to record a video for my friend.
Are you recording?
Yes.
What's good, Ehon? You're shit, bro.
But in the end, the Overwatch League just wasn't sustainable. With how early Blizzard cut off any organic growth of the esports scene, COVID-19 foiling all their plans for a global city-based franchise with homestands all around the world, and the esports bubble bursting, causing tons of teams and orgs to pull their funds out, with the later season basically being a who can spend the least amount of money on a roster challenge, the Overwatch League would eventually cease to exist, with the teams agreeing to a buyout and dissolving the league, labeling it as a failure. But while franchising is still a controversial subject in esports, you can't deny how influential the league was. It did bring a ton of attention to the game and had a lower barrier of entry since it was copying other traditional mainstream sports leagues with the city-based team model, which would later be adopted by the Call of Duty League as well, but that's a whole other can of worms. Knowing to expect the same teams to return every season made the format easier to understand, and for the short time it was around, the Overwatch League provided some of the most iconic esports moments, but I'm afraid that Overwatch esports will most likely never reach the heights it once did. Sure, the Overwatch Championship Series is a step in the right direction, with promotion and relegation to keep the team owners from slacking off, region-specific leagues so that the Koreans can stop stealing jobs from other regional talents, it being less gatekeeping and letting anyone compete with its open ecosystem, and partnering with other esports events like DreamHack and the Esports World Cup to subsidize the cost of massive LANs. But it's just far too late in my opinion. Like most fans, we can't help but have these what-ifs about the Overwatch League and the esports scene. What if COVID never happened and they were able to go through with their homestand ideas? Would the Overwatch League have succeeded? What if they went this route from the very start? Could Overwatch still be a top esports? What if they stayed on Twitch and didn't move to YouTube? What if Blizzard's management didn't sabotage the league by making poor decisions and fumbling the bag over and over again? But let's not linger on the past and be sad about how it ended, but rather be happy that it happened at all and for all the memories it has given us. With the lead up to Overwatch 2's launch, everything felt so scuffed. First, you had the abrupt announcement of Jeff Kaplan leaving Blizzard and the Overwatch team, which stunned the community, and would be replaced by Aaron Keller. Then you had the biggest change of this game going from 6v6 to 5v5, once again splitting the fanbase and causing even more confusion and controversy. I was a bit taken aback by this change at first, because it meant we had to let go of one person from our usual 6 stack that's been together for so long, and would no longer have tank synergies anymore, one of the core features of playing tank in Overwatch 1, but was deemed necessary to lessen queue times as apparently no one wanted to play tank anymore, and to consolidate all the CC abilities into one role and remove them from other DPS and support heroes, which caused Doomfist to shift into a tank. But the straw that broke the camel's back were the stack of controversies Activision Blizzard were receiving, and how terrible the environment was to work in, which had a huge effect on everything Overwatch related, with almost every Overwatch League sponsor pulling out, causing the league to lose a ton of money, changing McCree's name to Cassidy, because it was originally named after one of the employees directly responsible for some of the controversies, resulting in them removing commemorative features moving forward, such as the personable MVP skins, and had people actively boycotting everything Bobby Kotick related. To save face, they would speed things up by releasing a PvP beta to test out the new 5v5 game mode, and postpone the story mode once again to get the game out as soon as possible. Along with this came a bunch of new changes, such as the game going free to play, replacing loot boxes with a battle pass and cosmetic store, adding 3 new heroes at launch, Sojourn, Junker Queen, and Kiriko, a new game mode, Push, to replace the controversial 2CP maps, all the original characters getting redesigns to better reflect their new role in the lore, kinda like a time skip, locking future heroes behind a paywall, and they would eventually have to shut down the original Overwatch, wiping everything from our original career profile. But the actual day 1 launch was terrible, with the somehow even more horrific queue times, DDoS attacks, complicated phone verification, and the new god-awful competitive system. It felt like they messed up at every point possible, but they dug themselves an even deeper grave by cancelling the PvE story mode, the literal reason for why they abandoned the first game, which rightfully made a ton of players lose all faith in Overwatch 2. I'm not gonna lie, I was never really that excited for the story mode, so it didn't really bother me when it got cancelled. Sure, the limited time PvE events during Overwatch 1 were cool, and I would have been way more excited about a story mode back when it first launched in 2016, but that's not what kept me hooked on Overwatch. It was always the multiplayer and the competitive nature of the game. I would continue to play here and there, but would start to stray away around the time of Gina's release. With competitive being literal hell on earth, and all my friends moving on to other games, I just fell out of love with it. I'll still occasionally play with my friends again, but utterly refuse to solo queue this game anymore. I ain't built like that no more. But while things might be over for me, admittedly enough, Overwatch 2 seems to be slowly trending upwards again. They started collaborating with different IPs and creating custom themed skins for One Punch Man, Cowboy Bebop, Street Fighter, and even Le Seraphim. They introduced a bunch of new features like hero perks, map voting, hero bans, and the new stadium side mode. They started bringing back forgotten features they abandoned from Overwatch 1, an improved competitive system, and while the balancing is still questionable, they are responding faster to community backlash compared to Overwatch 1. But again, it feels like they made these changes way too late. They got too comfortable sitting on their throne, and many newer games started capitalizing on its faults, like Valorant, and most recently Marvel Rivals. I am a firm believer that competition is healthy and necessary for the video game industry. They force companies to be better and actually cater to the community, rather than sitting comfortably at the top and doing whatever they want, because where else are we gonna go? But no matter what, this game will forever have a special place in my heart. I'll always cherish the memories I made with this game and opt to remember the good times over what could have been.